I'm Big Don Luca, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs Podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
And I am also joined here by our new co-host, Rodrigo. He has recently joined the podcast with us amidst a flurry of, Twitter, a lot of Twitter DMs, and there could have been tampering. We don't know, but nonetheless, he is here. And Rodrigo, today we're going to be covering, of course, the Mavericks 130-122 loss to the Atlanta Hawks. But before we do that, of course, we're going to have Rodrigo introduce himself here. This is his sort of intro to the podcast. And Rodrigo, I guess, kind of talk about what made you interested in doing this and what was the starting point of your Mavs fandom?
Yeah, no. So, well, first off, I guess most people would know me, or if you do know me at all, I am on 105.3 The Fan as of the beginning of this year. So in January, so in February, I'll have a whole month at The Fan. And yeah, I'm just trying to, kind of get some reps in while I'm also kind of getting to start my work over there at The Fan and things like that. And I saw your guys' podcast and listening to you guys. It's kind of one of those things where I was 100% interested in joining you guys and kind of helping you guys, make this podcast the best it possibly can be. And I was always looking for people to either join up with and or start my own, but it kind of never really went my way. So it was one of those situations where I said, all right, well, these guys, they got a little bit of a following going on. So let's see what we can do together. And I'm 100% happy to be a part of this now. And I'm just really excited to get started. As far as my Mavs fandom goes, that kind of stretches back to about 2010, 2009 ish, a little bit before the championship year of 2011. And I do remember that championship run very, very well. I remember being at my car being not in my car, being in my dad's car. And we went to a check cashing site. I was listening to the Mavs game on the radio. That was the Lakers 4-0 sweep. And it was just such a, to see a team in my own city go as far as they did, win the whole thing, and just kind of, put the city on its back. It was something really nice to see. And I'm born and raised in Dallas. Born in Georgia, raised in Dallas. And yeah, no, just since then, 2011, again, followed the championship run, followed Dennis Smith Jr. when he was here. I've taken my little brother to a couple games here and there. And then, just obviously a big fan of Luka Doncic and what he's doing here in the DFW area. So that's pretty much, I guess, the whole story within my fandom. I don't know if I missed anything else. I guess one of my other favorite players is JJ Barea because he's so short.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, I was actually standing up to him. We're like very comparable heights one time when I was actually at a Mavs game one time, and I was walking on the 200 level, and this was, I believe, post-playing career. It was either a year or two ago, and he was doing the post game with Bally Sports, and me and him were like eye to eye. So that was a pretty cool moment. But nonetheless, some of that sort of stuff regarding the championship, that's an experience that me and Jaren, really don't have, ingrained into the data banks, down, back in our cerebellum and at the end of the brain. We don't have that experience. We were both really young at the time, and of course that's sort of what catalyzed my Mavs fandom, but that's definitely, I would be lying to you if I said it was like a centripetal part of it, because it was just so long ago. Right. But yeah, no, Rodrigo, we're really happy to join that you're joining us. Of course, we're excited. We're pumped. Sometimes it just takes a few things to materialize together, right? And regarding, you had some stops at on some other teams, had a few 10 days and things, didn't really work out. But now you got to start. Now you got to start in job. It's very like, I think a great similarity that we could compare this to would be like Christian Wood trying to earn his starting spot on the team, right? Sometimes it just takes a few things. Life has to throw you a few curveballs before you can reach your end, or not your end goal, but you can, reach that goal that you're trying to get to. And, in this instance, we had, Maxi Kleber, Dwight Powell, both of those guys had to be injured before Christian Wood could even get a starting spot. And, look at him now. Now he's blossoming into a near all-star level player. And I really do think that that's the sort of acceleration that you could have with your role over here at Mainstream Mavs. So we're really excited to have you. And we're really excited to cover this game with 3 co-hosts now. We're going to get into it. This 130-122 loss to the Atlanta Hawks tonight. A very lackluster defensive performance by the Mavericks. But before we do that, here is an ad from our sponsor, Anchor. All right, guys. So getting into it here, just to sort of take a step back and kind of look at this game just from a sort of overarching perspective. Rodrigo, what did you think of this game really from start to finish? It was a game where the Mavericks did have a lead for, a brief period there in the third quarter and, I believe parts of the fourth quarter, but it never really felt as if it was in their grasp. They constantly kind of were playing catch up to the Hawks and were kind of in this just basically high intensity sort of shootout, like almost like football when everybody's just constantly getting a touchdown on every single drive. It was very much like that. What do in terms of the start of the game, how did everything start to materialize for the Mavericks in terms of how they were able to really furbish themselves on the offensive end, and what kind of downfalls did we see on the defensive end?
Yeah, it's just been kind of the same old story of the entire year with as far as defense is concerned, rim protection and things like that. The Mavericks and the end of the game ended up with 21 total defensive rebounds and 10 offensive rebounds, and in total had 31. As far as the Hawks are concerned, they had 28 defensive rebounds and 7 offensive rebounds, and that totals up to 35. For those of you who aren't very math savvy, I know I'm definitely not, but it's just very, very telling that when a team can or can't pick up defensive rebounds, you can definitely. It's almost very telling that this team is very, very high powered as far as offense is concerned. And the worst part about it is, they took the lead for the first time in the game and around like the 8-minute mark of the third quarter. So, and again, they also opened up the game with, 3 turnovers in like the first couple minutes of the game. Normally I don't like to bash Luka because he's just really good at what he does, but he contributed to 7 of those. And that's again, something that the Mavericks need to really look into and slow down. I think is one of those things. Just slow the pace of the game, play at their own pace, and get the shots and get the looks that you want, because the Mavs shot 38%, a little bit over 38% from the 3-point line and 52% from the field. So again, it's just about getting those looks that you want and the shots up, with the right spacing and the right offensive look and defensive look. It needs to, everything kind of just needs to work out for this team, just for things to click in general.
No, like 100%. The Mavericks are obviously one of the more slower paced teams in the NBA. That's something that's really been prevalent for them and sort of a hallmark of, just their team since the beginning of the season. And in a game like this, I think that when they maybe try to up the ante, especially when the Hawks are running early, guys have a tendency to maybe get a little bit sloppy. I think that there might be something there, right? And, we saw time and time again, especially in that first and second quarter, simple, like rudimentary inbound passes were getting botched. Atlanta was getting out in transition, especially when you have, two lead guards and Trae Young and DeJounte Murray running the floor. They're able to, really dissipate, and they have really good spacing in transition. The Mavericks are going to be hard pressed to be able to get back. It's going to lead to a lot more open threes. So we saw in that first half how the pace of play was definitely haunting the Mavericks to an extent, right? They were kind of in a sort of, not in a sort of cliche way, like they were getting run out the gym, right? So
they kept up with them fairly well.
Yeah, like in the second half, I thought that the Mavericks really did turn it around, but in that first half, just like in terms of like the flow of the game, I thought that the shot making was there on the Mavericks side. It was more as if like I alluded to earlier, like they were playing catch up, right? Like it wasn't as if they were putting their foot in the ground and like, okay, like we are here to plant our foot and win this game. It was more as if like we're conceding all these baskets to Atlanta, and let's just see if our scoring can make up for it.
Yeah, to add to that, Atlanta defensively, they were blitzing Luka pretty much as soon as he crossed half court. I think that in terms of just being energetic and having some energy, Atlanta did a really good job of doing that and starting out the game with it, as you said.
I mean, literally the first possession of the game, DeJounte Murray off the jump ball, he got a steal off, I believe it was Dorian
Finney-Smith.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was kind of emblematic of the game, just in terms of like, the Hawks really taking lead in the Mavericks. I mean, not looking lackadaisical to an extent, but there were points in that first half where there was some sloppy basketball being played, especially, how you alluded to them having 16 turnovers in this game. They're typically a low turnover team. That was not the case tonight.
No, I mean, I want to say they had like 12 by halftime, and that's like their average per game. I know like a lot of that was due to, again, like I said, the Hawks just blitzing pretty much at half court. But even still, I think that you have to have guys in there that are comparable to sort of that 4-on-3 scenario, and we just didn't really see that. We saw the ball rush out of Luka's hands a lot of times, and that's really what led to a lot of these stupid turnovers.
Yeah,
well, you can almost forgive. I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was gonna say you can almost forgive Dorian Finney because he's been out for a good chunk of time. And he maybe wasn't expecting that from what you mentioned. It was DeJounte Murray getting the steal to open up the game there, and you can almost forgive Dorian Finney-Smith. I think Luka is one of the best passers in the game. You can't really debate it. He's definitely one of the best passers in the game. So the fact that he contributed to 7 of those 16 turnovers, it definitely, it's telling. It really is telling.
Yeah, like, so you say it's telling. In what way is it telling? Like, are you kind of basically alluding to him maybe, being so burnt out at this point in the season? Is that what you're, or are you just more so telling in like how they lost the game?
A little bit of both, actually. You can definitely attribute that to the way that he's burned out. He's been used. I mean, he managed to still score 30 points tonight and almost managed to get himself a double-double. I think he was like 2 assists away from getting a double-double. The burning out for sure is definitely the first thing that I can kind of think of at the top of my head. I think just the other thing too is just the lack of other playmakers on this team. I understand you have Christian Wood. Christian Wood is definitely a playmaker in his own right. Spencer Dinwiddie is also very, very good and very smart playmaker. DFS, maybe once he gets the rhythm back in, because he played 35 minutes in his first game back after an abductor injury. So, I mean, I don't think he should have been played that many minutes. I think he should have been more on a minutes restriction, just like Josh Green was, and maybe give a little bit more of an opportunity to Reggie Bullock, who oddly enough has been really hot as of late. He has 18 points, and he had 18 points tonight in 36 minutes. So again, I think players like him for now should be getting the start, or at least sharing a good load of the minutes alongside Dorian Finney-Smith.
No, yeah, and I mean, a point about Josh. I mean, like, you maybe think that they could kind of supplement both of those guys' minutes between each other as they're both coming back from injury. Kind of split it up a little more even keel, but that, to your point, they did kind of throw Dorian right into the fire there. I kind of want to get into Trae Young and his effect upon this game, because it wasn't as grand, I guess, as we would typically probably, foresee it being in a game where the Hawks scored 130 points and the Mavericks lost, we would probably project Trae Young to have some sort of 30-point haymaker or something like that. But he more so picked the Mavericks apart in the pick and roll. And the Mavericks bigs in Christian Wood and Dwight Powell, but I mean, largely Dwight Powell throughout stretches in that first half when Christian Wood got into early foul trouble, we're just very hard pressed to be able to play the pick and roll correctly. They had a hard, there's a sort of art to being able to play the pick and roll as a big, to, play in between a sort of hedge and a drop where, you're in that in-between area, but you're still applying enough pressure to that lead ball handler to where he can't just go straight up for a floater. But you're also just far back enough to be able to not concede the lob and sort of remediate the situation to where, they have to pass the ball back out and restart some other action. Right. And we saw in this game, the Mavericks big men just getting torched. They seemed as if their timing was off. Like one possession, they'd hedge, come up on a screen. Sometimes they'd switch outright and then they would just get blown by, or, they would try playing two back. They'd play too much back and they would concede a floater to, Young, or they would leave the lob pass up. Then it got to a point where it was so bad in the third quarter that the Mavericks had to start rotating one of their guys who was camped in the corner on maybe Collins or Bogdanovich at points, any of those guys who, when these actions are being ran for the Hawks in terms of their pick and rolls, are just standing in the corner as the outlet guy, just in case the possession goes haywire. And the Mavericks were having to rotate those guys over, and Trae Young was making the right read almost every time, finding those guys for open threes. And the Mavericks seemed like they were just basically getting picked apart in that sense. He had 12 assists. Is there any fix in terms of the personnel on this roster? I guess I'll start with you, Rodrigo, that the Mavericks can do to mend this situation?
Yeah, first off, I did, before I wanted to get into my answer on your question, the box score will tell you a lot about how the Hawks are much better at this point in time. Even though they're one game above 500 now at this point, since they picked up their 23rd win tonight, you can tell that the Hawks are better constructed by the box score just by looking at it. 100%. Because you had eight of their 9 players that touched the floor at all this tonight had double digits. John Collins, Okongwu, Hunter, Young, Murray, Griffin, Capella, Bogdanovich. All 8 of them had 10 plus points at any point by the end of the game. When you look at the Mavericks, Dorian Finney had 9, Powell had 6, Bertans had 3, McGee had 3, Green had 9, Hardy had 2. And again, I'm going to forgive Green and Finney-Smith specifically because, again, it was their first game back. And they should not, specifically, again, Dorian Finney-Smith should not have been on the amount of minutes that he was on. To answer your question, I think the one thing that the Mavs can do to, be better, I guess is the best way I can put it. To be better is those rotations. I mean, the minutes distribution too just needs to be a little bit better balanced because, yes, again, the fact that it took Dorian Finney-Smith coming back and having to put up 35 minutes on his own in the first night that he's back is ridiculous. That shows that the Mavericks do not have any forward help, and that they need somebody like Dorian Finney-Smith to produce constantly. He had a plus minus of -1. So again, he contributed, but couldn't contribute enough to make more things happen. He was 1 of 6 from the 3-point line. So again, the Mavericks need help. What way you get it, whether it's trades or whether it's signing somebody, it remains to be seen, but and the Mavs have been linked to plenty of players who can fill those positions and play those roles and help the Mavericks out. But it's just a matter of finding the right fit around Luka and everybody else, really.
Yeah. So I think adding to that a little bit, just in terms of how this roster is now, they are sorely missing a Maxi Kleber on this team. Just with how often the Mavericks would, I guess, just divert to one or the other, whether it would be pretty much attacking the ball handler on the pick and roll or just simply dropping and letting, Trae Young, or it was most of the time DeJounte Murray just hit a floater. I think that the Mavericks' lack of personnel, as you said, they just need to make a trade and everything like that. It definitely doesn't help the team, or definitely doesn't help, especially whenever you're playing such a great, I don't know about great, but you have John Collins. He's one of the better rim rollers in the league. Even Capella in his right, he's definitely one of the better guys doing that. Akunwu, he can grab pretty much any board need be, and so with that, he just has such good hands. But I mean, there's just so many guys on this roster, as you said, it's a roster construction, everything like that, that just do the right thing whenever it comes to, in particular, just the pick and roll. So many guys can hit a floater, so many guys can, lob, and of course roll to the rim, and of course slam it. But like, sorely missed is a rim protector, and I think that's the big need, because you look on this roster right now, the only quote unquote rim protector is JaVale McGee, and this guy's playing 3 minutes a game. So.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that there's credence to the fact that the Mavericks rotations could be crisper, as you alluded to, Rodrigo. I do think that that's really the only fix right now in terms of this personnel. Like, the Mavericks do, they can sort of fill in the gaps as much as they can in terms of, applying consistent effort. There's times, right, where I think Spencer and Luka in particular, they have a tendency to get lost on, like, they have spurts of like really energetic and, really good on ball, prolific defense. And then it's a possession where they just choose to take off, whether they're up by a lot or, it's just a second out of a back-to-back, things of that nature. I think filling in the gaps in terms of being a little more crisper on your rotation, especially with the guys that are seen as quote unquote bad defenders, like a Powell, a Dinwiddie, or a Doncic, even if, amongst Mavs fans, we can see that those guys are, it's sort of game dependent on if they're a good defender or not. Like as perceived by national media, those guys are probably, getting labeled more like average or bad defenders, right? So they can kind of fill in the gaps there maybe as much as they can, but to a certain extent, like you said, Jaren, everything does come down to personnel at this juncture. And the Mavericks simply do, like, just to put it quite frank, they lack probably one or two solid perimeter defenders to, be added in terms of, being included into this rotation. And they definitely lack a rim protector, probably more so than anything. I mean, I posted that poll on Twitter today asking what the Mavericks' most pressing need is between a rim protector and and more perimeter defenders. I think that's definitely a conversation to be had. I mean, I think a lot of people would probably choose rim protection. It's sort of up in the air, but when we do our trade deadline podcast, and we'll have a couple podcasts really honing in on trades and things of that nature that the Mavericks could pull out before the trade deadline ensues. We're going to get into that. Like, what is a certain archetype of a player that the Mavericks, sorely need the most, whether it's a ball handler or a rim protector, things of that nature. Right. But, specifically in this one, the Hawks bigs between Colin Okongwu and Clint Capella combined for 46 points tonight. And, I know that they do have a sort of nice little conglomerate of big men there, and they're all kind of diverse in terms of their skill set and very distinct in that nature. But I mean, that is for a position that isn't as coveted in today's NBA, barring this sort of transcendent all-world centers like an Embiid or a Jokic, that is conceding a lot of points at the rim. And especially for a lot of those guys, outside of Collins three-pointers, a lot of those are via those guys literally just camping in the dunker spot, or, that's basically where most of it came, and literally just, rolling hard, waiting for the lob, or camping in the dunker spot off, missed rotations, and the Mavericks getting all mangled up in terms of their defense, so them just getting a wide open dunk. And I mean, very few of those points were 3-pointers, maybe a few from Collins and a couple transition buckets, but a lot of that was just simply mishaps from the Mavericks. And I do think that points even more so towards the Mavericks needing both, better perimeter defense and better rim protection, right? And is it an indictment upon the Mavericks, rotation guys that they're not able to do it? Like you said, Rodrigo, Dorian Finney-Smith, he's a guy that's just coming off an injury. He's obviously probably going to get blown by a little more than if he's, complete holistic, ready to go DFS. So let's not, we can save a little bit of blame in terms of him. Dwight Powell, especially in those lineups with Christian Wood, where, one of those guys is having to guard a size down, that hurts them a lot. They can get blown by pretty easily. Dwight Powell has a stark inability to be able to flip his hips on defense. That was on full display tonight. And then Dinwiddie and Luka, they honestly looked like they were missing a ton of rotations, in my opinion. I thought Dinwiddie, he was tasked with guarding DeJounte Murray tonight. He did a mildly okay job throughout the first few quarters. I actually tweeted as much. He was really definitely forcing him into those mid-range scenarios, but then once DeJounte got cooking, it was more so a matter of, I'm going to get to my spot and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. And quickly we saw those mid-range jumpers that Dinwiddie was conceding quickly turn to basically being almost like a layup because of how hot DeJounte Murray got, just in terms of furbishing his own offense from the perimeter and with inside the arc, right? So then we look to the bench, and Reggie Bullock, he had a sort of weird start to the game, but once his offense started really flowing and he started getting the ebb and flow of that, his defense kind of worked parallel with that. And we've seen this from him where he has sort of a trend to be able to follow up good offense with good defense. But there have been stretches this season where his offense is really bad, then his defense also sucks as well. Josh Green, I thought, played a really good defensive game when he was tasked, having to guard Murray and Young in stretches. But at the end of the day, he only played 20 minutes. You could have thrown him a bone, give him a few more minutes in a game like this. But then again, he's coming off that right elbow sprain. So I kind of just deciphered their rotation tonight. And we look at this, and if we're counting Josh Green's minutes, he played, he really, the only two guys that played 20 or more minutes off the bench were him and Reggie. And, Josh really just didn't get near as much burn as the starters and all that sort of stuff. So if we're really breaking it down, the Mavericks kind of had like 1.5 guys of decent defense in a sort of sense tonight. And I mean, it just points to them needing a major upgrade in both perimeter defense and rim protection, because they're just getting blown by. They're missing rotations all too often, and they don't have anybody to hold down the paint when those mishaps happen. Last year's team, comparatively, they had a great perimeter defense, top 5 in the league after the turn of January. Of course, they didn't have that rim protector, and that ended up haunting them when they got to the Western Conference Finals. But we do have to realize that they did have a really good rotational defense, even if all the guys weren't as, talented, statistically in terms of their wingspan, in terms of their verticality and lateral quickness. They had a sort of spirit and invigoration to really get after it on that end that this team this year, for whatever reason, very similar personnel, just doesn't have. So, I mean, next up, after we kind of really broke down and picked apart their defensive woes tonight, what was going right for the Mavericks tonight? Because, we do want to hash out some positives, of course, amidst all these, defensive negatives. What were they doing right on offense? I guess we'll start with you, Jaren. Particularly with Luka at the point of attack, he was getting double teamed. There were a lot of 4-on-3 scenarios. How are the Mavericks able to score 122 points in this game?
Yeah, really, truthfully, I mean, the way Luka was doubled at the point of attack was just so aggressive that it pretty much took 2 of the Hawks defenders already out of the play. And it was like a true 4-on-3. We didn't see any guys, try and come back and help. The Mavericks offense was just so quick, I guess. And this was honestly like one of the first games I feel like of the season where it's, I know that you said it like towards the beginning of the pod, where it just kind of felt like the Mavericks were trying to just keep up with the Hawks. And doing so, they played really fast pace on the offensive side. I mean, again, they scored 122, which I believe, they had 123 against the Blazers at one point. But needless to say, I mean, it was just sort of this 4-on-3 scenario where, you see Christian Wood get it at the top of the key. He drives down, and usually there was an open shooter at the corner. And most of the time it was Reggie Bullock. Props to him. I think he made 4 of his 7 shots from deep. Yeah, he did. So I think, more or less it was just sort of this fast paced sort of offense where the Mavericks kind of got they found the open shooter just through hockey assists and passing it around the horn and everything like that. The points that they did get inside and that they, did very rarely form inside, was like pretty much just finding either Christian Wood on an ISO situation where he got, he was able to score on a Kunwu, or Collins. I think those were like his two main matchups. We even saw, really, I mean, the only guy that could kind of score inside was Christian Wood. Truthfully, we saw, of course, Luka find his rhythm throughout the game. He was able to, I think it was definitely a lackluster game, one where he was sort of taken out of it. But even still, he was able to find his rhythm throughout the game. He got to the foul line quite a bit, I think 12 times in this matchup. But even still, the points that the Mavericks did find inside was just due to, honestly, ISO situations. I didn't, there was, of course, the few pick and rolls here and there, but I didn't really see anything out of the normal in terms of like how the Mavericks were scoring inside outside of like Luka ISO. And of course, I think we saw a little more of Christian ISO, to be honest, in this matchup.
Yeah, as well as I think Spencer they actually deferred to him quite a bit. We've been talking on this podcast the last few episodes about how we thought Spencer was sort of losing the title of like that distinguished secondary lead ball handler, right? And, amidst this whole stretch of Luka just essentially going God mode, Spencer has kind of been lost in the sauce a little bit. He's been playing a lot more off ball, a lot more complimentary, which, I mean, as he should, as the quote unquote secondary ball handler. But at the same time, he is a guy that needs to alleviate some of the, pressure from Luka. And I mean, I thought he did a great job attacking what the defense gave him tonight. He was shooting, the heck out of the ball. He had a few threes that were like pull-ups or just step backs. I was like, wow, like it was some of those like no, yes shots. But I mean, he's been shooting so good from three this year. I was really impressed with his game tonight and how he was able to really just diagnose mismatches. And then he always has such a good sort of pace of play where he's able to, he gets a big switch onto him, kind of takes it back out. That's when we saw in that first half when he had that dunk over Okongwu, when he got him switched onto him, he sort of dribbled back out and was like, okay, obviously I got a big on me now. I don't need to rush this. I'm going to give him the hesitation. And whenever he bites, I'm going to go, but it's not something that, I just see him and get all happy and go lucky and go straight to the rim. Right. So I think that definitely aided in, amidst the Mavericks scoring 122 tonight. But also, within the waning moments of the game, the last like 5 minutes, the Mavericks offense did seem to stall out a bit. So we'll go ahead and get into their woes here in a second. Rodrigo, what kind of went wrong for the Mavericks in those last few minutes? They'd been having such a good offensive game. What started to give? Do you think it was just sort of a momentum swing by the Hawks and they were able to just sort of take lead from there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the biggest issues down the stretch for the Mavericks, and it's happened multiple times this season. This isn't just an isolated scenario or situation. Basically, what happened, I think, was that the Mavericks started jacking up a bunch of shots and just kind of getting desperate. I think that was the big thing, is that again, it was a back and forth affair. I don't think the need for those desperate shots was needed. In the box score, the final numbers for the fourth quarter was the Hawks won that quarter 32-25. The Hawks won every quarter outside of the second and the third quarter. They tied the second quarter 25 all. And then they lost the second quarter. The Mavs won the third quarter, 35-33. And in large part, it was due to that 10-0 run to start the second half. I mean, they started off on a 10-0 run, and it looked like, the Mavericks were going to begin to run away with it. But something happened, whether it was, I can't really recall in the moment right now, whether it was defensively or offensively, but it was just something happened in that 10-0 run became a momentum switch for Atlanta as well. So again, it just really came down to desperate shooting. I did want to touch up on something real quick from the previous segment. One thing that I can admire about a player like Dwight Powell, and I remember Mike Bassick, who's on the Fan, mentioning this one time, is Dwight Powell is one of the hardest workers in the league. He's not particularly good at anything, but he's one of the hardest workers in the league. And I adore that take from Mike to this day, because it's true. He may not be particularly good at something, but he is one of the hardest workers in the game. And he will put up 22 minutes of, I'm going to throw myself for the ball. I'm going to die for it. I'm going to I'm going to bleed for this team down to the last minute that I'm on the floor. So
Quite literally.
Yeah.
Very true.
But yeah, no, other than that, like I said, what really did the Mavericks or hurt them at the end of the game was just getting desperate and jacking up shots for any reason, really.
Yeah. No, and I mean, to your point about Powell, like regarding the sort of indictments, like when I, talk about his defense or something of that nature, it's never to discredit him in any manner for like the things that he does for this team. At the end of the day, Kirk Henderson, Mavs Moneyball podcast, he actually talks a lot about, his experience because he played as a rim roller when he was in high school. And rim, to his point, rim rolling is a very hard skill to sort of, especially, all these limbs going everywhere. You're trying to circumnavigate through the lane. These NBA players, obviously, they're really fast. And a lot of bodies flying everywhere. And, you're diving to the rim to try and catch a ball over all these people. Like, it's not an easy attribute. I don't really care how tall you are. And Dwight Powell is, consistently in the 99th percentile almost year after year in that, category. I mean, sure, it's tailed off a little bit this year. Christian Wood has got more of those pick and roll scenarios with Luka as of recent, but that's not to take away from the things that he does very well and the attributes that he possesses as a basketball player that, bode very well for this team, So by no means are a lot of these guys on the Mavericks, if we look at Dwight Powell, Dorian Finney-Smith, like Reggie Bullock, none of these guys are particularly bad players by any means. I think that a lot of fans' gripes with them are more so that they're one-dimensional. Like you said, Rodrigo, like they don't have a sort of diversification of their skill set. Like, Dorian, every once in a while you'll see the occasional attack off of a closeout. I mean, even with Reggie tonight, we saw him attack off a closeout for a layup. But, they're basically, for the most part, like strictly 3-and-D players. I mean, there's little elements that they do well outside of that. Like Dorian's a good offensive rebounder. Dwight Powell, he is also like a good offensive rebounder. He's always good at like being in the right position, great hustle player. But, they definitely stick to their archetypes of like Dwight Powell being a rim roller, like these guys being 3-and-D players, right? And I think it's the sort of, desire from a fan perspective to get that implementation of more diversity within the lineup, right? More guys that can do a lot of things, like on the Hawks, who have 8 different players in double figures, like DeAndre Hunter, for instance. Yes, like, he's a very, esteemed 3-and-D player. That's essentially the hallmark of his game, but he's a guy that does have some sort of pseudo offensive creation abilities to him, right? Bogdanovich, he's not, he's definitely, honestly, kind of more of a point guard at this juncture than he is a shooting guard, kind of how he came into the league. He's been able to really harbor his playmaking abilities over the last couple of years. AJ Griffin, this guy's a rookie. And, right now he's more of a catch and shoot 3-and-D guy. But even him, he had a few like side steps and a few times where he drove to the rim that I was, admittedly kind of surprised by. And then, of course, like you have 2 very dynamic ball handlers in Trae Young and DeJounte Murray to be able to really facilitate things and lead things at the point of attack. And especially in Murray, who does all that on offense and still one of the best guys really defending, 1s and 2s in the league. The Hawks, we obviously talked about their record being 23-22, not being near as good as the Mavericks. Well, not near as good, but not being as good as
they're about as good as the Mavericks.
Yeah, about as good as the Mavericks. Yeah. I kind of just botched that there. But they, we look at the sort, and I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but we look at this sort of stark difference between just because Trae Young had a year or two where he was not able to really lead his team to the playoffs, and Luka really only needed 1 year. That bought the Hawks a little time to acquire the necessary draft capital to really get this thing going. And I mean, GM Travis Schenck has done a great job, surrounding that team and Trae Young with very contributory role players who are not one-dimensional, right? And yes, they've had their problems this year. There's been some beef with Trae Young and McMillan. They haven't had their full array of players, and they've definitely been limited in that in a sense. And there is maybe some underlying chemistry issues there. We don't really know what's going on, but this was a game, for one of the first games, they mentioned this in the ESPN broadcast, that this team was fully healthy, right? And we saw the depth of Atlanta tonight on full display. And conversely, we saw how limited the Mavericks rotational depth was compared to Atlanta. I mean, the Hawks had, some guys like Justin Holiday got a DNP-CD on the Hawks tonight. He would play real rotational minutes on this Mavericks team. I think that we can say that without a shadow of a doubt. Same as probably Aaron Holiday. And I mean, these are guys that are not even registering minutes because this Hawks team is so deep. I mean, that Jalen Johnson kid, he's really
Kaminsky. Even hell, he would even get significant minutes on the Mavericks. I did want to pose a question to the two of you guys, and we could either start with Will or Jaren. Do you guys think that Spencer Dinwiddie is more of a mature version of Jalen Brunson?
You go ahead and go first, Jaren.
Mature version of Jalen Brunson? I don't think so. I think, what we're seeing Jalen Brunson do in New York is just really, I don't know, it's indicative of who he is. Spencer Dinwiddie, to call him Jalen Brunson is definitely like a harp on his game. I don't think he is. I think he's filled the role as best as he can. And that's saying a lot. I think he's done an amazing job. But to fill, the Jalen Brunson role, or to say he's a mature Jalen Brunson, I just don't think that does him justice, because at the end of the day, I mean, they're two different completely players. The way that they score the ball, the way that they defend, I mean, the demeanor that they have about the game, it's all different. To me, it was always just coming into the season, of course, it was always a big question was, is Spencer going to fill the Brunson role? Has he done that? I think, you can put an asterisk around it. I think he definitely has. He's done, as best of a job as he can. But just that the way that, Brunson gets his points is, just kind of, I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, he just like dribbles the clock out, but not dribbles the clock out. And he just hoists up shots and puts it in. With Spencer, he methodical in the way that he can get to the hoop sometimes. We've seen him have his doubts getting to the hoop to where he kind of just relies on a fadeaway. And, of course, we've seen most of those be misses, but also Spencer can operate in the ISO and just get, his usual step back threes that he does. I just think to call him a mature Brunson probably doesn't do him justice. I think Spencer, especially on this roster, how it's built, is probably more equipped on the bench more than anything. We just, we don't have the luxury to put him there. He's a guy that has to start with his current rendition. But needless to say, I think he's done as good of a job as he can, or as good of a job as he has done filling that role. And that's such a big role to fill. And I think he's done, honestly, a really good job of however you want to call it, secondary playmaker or Jalen Brunson role, whatever you want to call it. I think he's done an amazing job.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized that really good, Jaren. I don't know how much I can add to that. Yeah, I mean, and just in terms of how they operate offensively, we've obviously seen I guess you can call it a maturation from Brunson's time in Dallas to where he is in New York now. I mean, he's put up like multiple 30+ point games in a row. He's on an absolute tear right now, right? And we try not to talk about Brunson on this podcast too much. Like, obviously we'll allude to the whole offseason thing, but to an extent, like it is in the past, he is in New York now, right? But I do think that, like, stylistically they are different. I think Brunson has grown into probably a better, Spencer may, I don't even know what their assist numbers are, but I would have presumed that they're probably like not too far off, but I definitely think they're different in terms of how they operate as playmakers. Spencer, I think, is more of a ball mover. He, when tasked to run a pick and roll, he can definitely do it, but he's definitely a guy that is more like, I'm going to get to my spot and set you up. Brunson's more of a guy that I can see really leading the charge and like, I'm going to deliver this pass to you in this place. And, so you're going to be able to, the basket is going to kind of like be sort of hand woven and presented to you, right? Like that, if that makes any sense, just in terms of how they're getting guys shots. Like Brunson's more inclined to, throw a lob pass to a guy. Spencer's more inclined to draw a double team and then pass to a wide open shooter. Okay. So there's that. And then they obviously have there's different intricacies and just in terms of how they operate offensively. Brunson's a lot more like stop and fake heavy. He's using a lot more of like his like lateral quickness to operate with inside 8 feet, using his pivot foot to his advantage a lot more to, get those little close fadeaway shots and stuff. Spencer's more of the type that's going to, really try to pick apart a mismatch. And if you're a smaller guard, he's going to post you up. If you're bigger, he's going to just try to blow past you and continuously draw fouls. Brunson's definitely like more of a tough bucket getter, quote unquote. So yeah, there's like the different intricacies. I think the player that I think Brunson, I will say as much, was definitely on the ascension. And I think he would have took yet another leap as we see him do with the Knicks. Versus Spencer, I think he's at this stage in his career where he's like in the prime of his career, right? And he's a very solid secondary ball handler, but I don't know if he still has, I don't know if he really had the room to grow that Brunson had. I really do think to an extent, as we're kind of seeing with Brunson in New York right now, like the Mavs kind of did have a second star in their hands, and it looks like more as if that prerogative is growing true and true every day as he continues to carry away in New York Knicks Dome and maybe not really lead them to wins. They're I don't know exactly what the record is.
I think they have a better record than us now.
Yeah, they have a better record than us.
I believe so. We've been going through a back and forth with the Knicks on like records. It's kind of funny.
That is
25 and 20 is the record for the Knicks.
I stand corrected. So he's
we dropped.
Yeah, I did not realize how much this little stretch has done to us amidst losing these last 3 games. So yeah, I mean, with that being said, I mean, nonetheless, though, they're like, okay, they're of the same ilk of the Mavericks, where they're like in that sort of right above 500 territory or slightly, above 500 territory or whatever you want to call it, right? And I mean, for them to be doing that with him as essentially their best player is definitely indictment upon how much we missed him. I definitely would say that without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, no. So the only reason why I was kind of mentioning that or kind of, alluding to the fact that they could be cut from the same cloth, if I want to use that analogy, is just because I see a lot of Jalen Brunson stat lines, and then I look at Spencer Dinwiddie stat lines, and I'm like, they're not too horribly dissimilar. I mean, yeah, right now the average points per game for Spencer is about 16 points per game, as opposed to JB, who has a much better average points per game. He's averaging about 22. And when I didn't say that, Spencer is a more mature version of Jalen, it's just because, again, obviously Spencer's older.
Yeah.
But then again, just turn to the fact that, I think Spencer, in my opinion, is a better 3-point shooter than Jalen.
Yeah.
But Jalen can get to the rim a little bit better than Spencer. So like there's a little bit, and in my eyes, there's like a little bit of each other in each other, for lack of a better word. I know that sounded so wrong, but
no, I get what you're saying. There's different aspects of their games that I think we see come out more in different games. Like Spencer occasionally will defer more to that three-pointer. Brunson, he's obviously going to try to get to the rim more, but at the end of the day, they do fill the same role as being that guy who's second fiddle next to Luka. The only sort of sacrificial lamb there that the Mavericks don't have that they had last year was they don't have that third guy. And that is where the call for another ball handler is, right? You don't have Spencer to come off and fill that void anymore. You have this sort of interesting conglomerate of Jaden Hardy, Frank Ntilikina, and, Theo Pinson and somewhat Josh Green whenever, if you're really just heavily pressed to get another ball handler in there, and you have to kind of force his hand there to run some point guard. So I mean that's the big difference amidst all this. Yes, like there, slight intricacies between those two guys in terms of how, like, exactly how they play, but Brunson, I think at the end of the day, probably contributes to winning, is probably a slightly better player than Dinwiddie. I don't know if Dinwiddie could go to that Knicks team and do what Brunson is doing right now, to be quite frank with you. But, to my point, like if Dinwiddie was relegated to the third option here, just imagine how lethal this Mavericks team would be this year. It's a sad discussion, but we don't want to dread too much, of course. Was there anything else just in terms of guys that played tonight? We talked about Dorian. We talked about how effective Christian Wood was and isolations tonight. And just in terms of, really being that outlet when they had Powell on the floor. And Powell was the main facilitator of the 4-on-3. Christian Wood was doing a great job hitting his threes. He's doing a great job running the floor, getting in transition. He had a great offensive game. His shortcomings defensively were kind of hit or miss in terms of his pick and roll coverage, but he had a great offensive game. Dwight Powell, I thought he hustled well and, played his role to a T in the minutes he was there. He just obviously struggled defensively. Spencer, we obviously alluded to Spencer and Luka and how good they did. The Mavericks bench effort tonight. Let's talk about Josh Green. He had a great game in his return tonight. 9 points, of course, only 20 minutes, but he hit that 1-3 from the corner. He did a really good job of anytime that he caught the ball off a dribble handoff at the top of the key. When there was a lane open to attack, I mean, he went with full force and, sort of a bludgeoning sense of I'm going to get to the basket and get a foul called, and I'm going to get to the free throw line, or I'm going to, make a tough layup. And, he had a few layups, virtue of that. He had a really nice dunk. And I thought he played pretty active defense. Were you guys surprised by him playing this good on his first game back?
I think honestly, it felt weird because we hadn't had that sort of energy on this team for 20 games or whatever amount of games he missed. So it was definitely a little bit of an energy booster, and it felt good. But it was definitely different out of the norm from what we, come accustomed to seeing. But just the way that he was able to keep some possessions alive was just huge in this one. I know that there was 2 times, I think, where he was able to sort of hide behind players and keep possessions alive just by pickpocketing and even inbounds pass. I think he stole an inbounds pass one time. Just the way that he was able to do that. Keep possessions alive, sort of bring, as I said, energy to this team. It was really different, really. I wouldn't say different. It's just what he does. But from what we've seen over the last 20 games, it's definitely more of a outlier. And I think it was honestly refreshing to see him come in, provide such big minutes, even offensively. In just 20 minutes, he provided 9 points off the bench, and that was really huge for the effort that the Mavericks gave. And whenever he was in, it seemed like the Mavericks were, fully forced. There was one lineup that it was in the halfway through the second mark that I really want to see more of, and it involved Josh Green in it. It was Josh Green, Hardy, Luka, Spencer, and then Christian Wood. I think that, offensively, that's a lineup that you can really, really work with, especially in transition. And that's sort of what I wanted to see out of it. We didn't get to see a whole lot because, again, Hardy only played 4 minutes in this one. But that's a lineup I want to see a little more out of. And really, the heart of that lineup and the heart of pretty much the lineups that he's in is Josh Green.
No, 100%.
So, real quick. So Jaren, real quick, I did want to ask you, so with that lineup of Jaden Hardy, Spencer, Luka, and who else did you say was on the floor with that one?
Spencer, Luka, Wood, Hardy, and then Green.
Wood, Hardy, and Green. Who is playing the forward spots?
Yeah, and that's what you're missing. You have Christian Wood. You have, I think, Jaden Hardy or Josh Green is probably your most forward type guy. It's definitely a defensive exploit. But the thing is you can run the offense with it. I know the Mavericks, they probably rank dead last in transition offense and just in terms of speed. But this is sort of a lineup that you can use, you can exploit offensively. I know defensively it might be a little bit of a hamper in the half court offense, but I think if there's any sort of speed, and the Hawks like to run with speed. So I think, you can buy time with that lineup. Again, we didn't get to see it a whole lot. I would like to see it more, but yeah, it definitely defensively is where that hamper is on that lineup. But it was just such like a refreshment, just something different that I would like to see more of it.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think even within operating in the half court offense, that lineup works well. I mean, you have three guys at that. Well, I mean, four if you want to count Josh and his sort of pseudo creation ability. Four guys that can like really blow past somebody off a single dribble blow by and get to the rim. And like the sort of dynamism that can persist out of that is really intriguing, especially with Wood's inclusion there being, relegated to running all those pick and rolls and, just waiting in the dunker spot. If all those guys are able to, get past the first wave of defense and then, start that domino effect where they're just passing it around until it reaches Wood at the rim. Like there's a lot of different possibilities offensively. They're obviously very undersized defensively, and that's a very heavy reliance on Wood to really be, that stronghold down there as a rim protector. And, really Josh is the only quote unquote positive defender on the other end. But I mean, during stretches where things get stale, I would like to see that line up a little more. I'd like to see a little more Hardy minutes, outside of that, I thought Reggie had a very good game today. We talked a lot about him. His defense definitely correlated to his offense once he started to get going. Admittedly, I thought his defense was kind of abysmal within that first half, but he shot 4 for 7 from 3. He had a few really good cuts, which I was really surprised by. That's something we really only see when his offense is really in sync. And he had a few nice cuts. There was one possession where Josh Green attacked from the baseline and got it to him. I was one of my favorite possessions of the game. And Reggie, he had cut from like the opposite weak side wing, and he went up for the layup. And like I was really impressed by that. That caught me, sort of took me aback. I can't even lie to you. Besides that, he had a really good shooting game. That's I think that we've kind of covered it all from that standpoint. Just a really sort of concerted offensive effort from the Mavericks. And, they were definitely able to get things going. And there was a lot of different actions that they sort of went throughout this game, with those different lineups on the floor, in the non-Luka minutes. I was, pretty readily impressed by how they were able to score. We saw some Josh Green, obviously drives to the rim, some Reggie cuts, like things of that nature. Like I was impressed by those actions. But then we saw the offense kind of get stale and them defer to isolation ball at the end of the game. And obviously that whole segment about the defense kind of sums it up in itself, just in terms of how much abysmal it was in this game. And the Mavericks do move forward and they play the Clippers on
Miami Heat.
Miami Heat.
It's the Miami Heat next up.
Okay. I said this in the last podcast too. I keep having this sort of complex that the Mavericks are playing the Clippers next. It's always the Clippers next. I don't know why, but nonetheless, Mavericks will be playing the Heat at 6:30 on Friday. We'll be back, of course, for coverage on that podcast. But we do want to get in one quick thing before we end this podcast. We don't have time to talk about this Mark Cuban quote that we'd originally planned to talk about today that came out with Tim McMahon in regards to the Mavericks upgrading the roster and Luka's sort of discontent with the current roster. We're definitely going to be getting into that. And that's a huge topic of discussion when we get into our trade deadline podcast. That's definitely something we do want to talk about. But there was a Jason Kidd quote post game that I kind of want to get into. This was Jason Kidd's thoughts on the Mavericks defensive woes. If it's with this personnel, you have to, and I'm quoting him quote for quote, if it's with this personnel, you have to keep asking or demanding for those guys to play defense. It's not just the offensive end. And tonight, again, we gave up 130. The team shot 57%. It's just like shoot around. What were y'all's thoughts on Jason Kidd sort of like actively kind of really not like throwing shade, but definitely kind of, sort of a call to action from these Mavericks players at the beginning when he says, if it's with this personnel, kind of alluding to them possibly needing to change their personnel in some sort of fashion. What did you guys have to make of that quote post game by Jason Kidd?
Roddy, you go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, no. So I mean, really, it was the kind of it was similar to the kick in the ass moment where with Luka from last season, where he asked Luka to play better. Essentially, is what he asked him to do. He's like, last season, J Kid asked Luka to play a little bit better defensively and show a little bit more effort on that side of the ball. That resonated, or that quote was very, very similar, eerily similar in my eyes to that quote from that J Kid told Luka basically during the presser. And it's also kind of a call to action to the front office if you really want to think about it, because he's basically holding up the exact same sign that Luka's holding in the picture that Mark Cuban hates so much, and that's send help. That's give me help. Give me more to work with, because he does not have enough to work with in my eyes to, make this team the contender that it needs to be, that it should be. And you lose a key piece in Jalen Brunson, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, not just in this podcast, but outside of the podcast, the fandom, everybody else has talked about this ad nauseum, where we've lost somebody that can contribute and was a key component to the Mavericks reaching the Western Conference Finals. The Mavericks, what they need to do is go out and get somebody that, can put up 16 points, 15 points on a consistent basis, not just be 16 one night, 3 one night, 15 in the next, 4 the next one. It needs to be a consistent, and I sent you guys my notes at the beginning of the show. The Mavs have been linked to 10 different players, and I can go down the list, and you guys can tell me if each one of these players would fit the 16 plus role that I'm mentioning. Cam Reddish,
Probably not.
No.
Trae Young,
Yeah.
Yes.
Bojan,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bradley Beal,
Yeah.
For sure.
Terry Rozier,
Yes.
Yeah.
Zach LaVine,
Yes.
Emmanuel Quickly.
Maybe one day, not now.
Yeah, I was like, yeah.
He's working there.
Yeah.
He's getting there.
Mhm.
Karis LeVert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like him. I personally like him. I'm there.
He's comparable to TSJ. He does have some inconsistency, so I'd probably go no on him. I'd hedge no, but
John Collins?
Yeah. Yeah. I was like,
I'm gonna go no.
I mean, he showed out tonight.
Okay, so when you're saying a consistent 16 points, for me, no, John Collins always plays great against the Mavericks. He had a hell of a game tonight.
Valid.
But I'm looking at more along the lines of, like you said, they're getting you at least 16 every night, not more as if they average 16. Like if they can, you're talking about guys.
Yeah, that's fair.
100% players, right? That's kind of what Brunson was. That's what he grew into. Dinwiddie still has the occasional dud game. That's why he's more kind of well suited to be relegated to the bench at some point if we're ever able to get to that guy. The second best player doesn't necessarily have to be a star. I think that would be preferred next to Luka. But if we're talking idealistically, the second best player needs to have a level of consistency that is, emblematic of a guy that is like a top 50 player in this league to an extent, right? That he's not just going to, score 25, but I had a bad and I just took the day off and I only scored 7 the next game, right? It's like these are 100% players. So I think a couple of those guys on that list, particularly like LaVine and Young, like the 100%, like those are guys I'd love to play second fiddle to Luka. A lot of Mavs fans have the tendency to sort of pick their poison and start being like, we can iron out fit with this guy. Like I'm down to talk about fit all day. We can talk about who's a better fit next to Luka. But at the end of the day, to get any of these guys, Rodrigo, the Mavericks have to accumulate asset wealth. And right now, the Mavericks wealth creation is kind of on, the level of me with my entry level jobs. And, me working in like a restaurant at 20 years old versus the esteemed entrepreneur, Mark Cuban type level. Like they don't have any sort of wealth creation right now. Like, they'll have to give up a king's ransom for
they'll have to
Yeah.
give up a king's ransom for any one of these players. The last player on my list is DeAndre Ayton, who the Mavericks have been linked with this season.
I think he would be a number 2, even though we're not talking like I didn't know if we were kind of like talking about guards or center specifically, but yes, I would say he's a number 2.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot of different talking points, especially with that quote, just defensively and everything like that. Any guy that you listed there, you can make work within this rotation, of course, defensive rotation that being. But nonetheless, I mean, just the current rendition that this Mavericks team has, like you can't expect great defensive numbers. I think they rank 25th in the league right now. And that's, I mean, I know that they just got 2 of the 3 best players back on the defensive side of things, but even still, I mean, this is a roster that's well mismanaged. And I mean,
mismanaged. That is like the penultimate juxtaposition to describe the Mavericks.
Yeah, I mean,
mismanaged. I like that.
No, and it's just, I mean, I know a lot of people who say this. Nico Harrison has his checkbook cut out from the summer, so we'll see what happens. But needless to say, this offense or this defense is just, especially the last 3 games, has been just
no, we're definitely going to be getting into like all these sort of guys and the idealistic fit with the Mavericks and Luka. We'll get into Mark Cuban, who is writing Nico Harrison's checkbook or not writing it at some point in the near future. We're going to be getting into all that sort of stuff. And, you know, Mark Cuban's going to be here regardless, guys. So we can decipher the ins and outs of his role as an owner all we want, but we still have to operate under the assumption that he's the owner of this team, because unless something tragic happens, he is the leader at the clubhouse at Dallas Mavericks LLC. But nonetheless, today it was great having you on, Rodrigo, for the first time. Really excited about our the future stuff that we got going over here at Mainstream Mavs. Thank you guys for listening. If you made it this far in the podcast, make sure to like and subscribe and comment if you're listening on YouTube. We are Mainstream Mavs Podcast at YouTube. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at mainstream_Mavs. If you guys are listening on any other platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Anchor, make sure to subscribe and follow us and give us a 5-star rating if you feel so inclined. We really appreciate you guys making it this far in the podcast. We're really excited about the ascension that we're about to take with you guys. We really do think that, you know, now that we got 3 co-hosts, we're ready to grind and really get through this season and more seasons to come with you guys. So we appreciate you guys for listening, and we will catch you guys Friday night after the Mavericks versus Heat game.
Before we turn this off, Roddy, you got to get a signature send off real quick.
A signature outro. Oh, make it up on the fly. All right.
See ya.
There you go. Okay. So I got mine. Bye-bye.
There we go.